Alright, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. It's time for another Friday Rambling, and we're swinging back around to DC Comics. No, it's not the Justice Society. It's not even the Justice League. Is it the vaunted Teen Titans? No, we are discussing, in a real quick little sneak preview style breakdown, the fourth generation of DC heroes. That's right. The Society was the heroes of the World War II era. The League was your heroes of the next generation. And the League sidekicks formed the Titans. Well, what happened when the Titans grew up? That is a question DC had to ask themselves. Over the course of many years of the Teen Titans run, the characters had been allowed to age into young adults. After a few years off of doing solo things, they were brought back together in a book simply called Titans. Here's where things get interesting, though. DC still liked the idea of teen sidekicks. Over time, they had introduced other Robins after Dick Grayson, the Robin who would become Nightwing and lead the Titans, as well as Kid Flash becoming Flash, and eventually gaining a Kid Flash of his own, who used the name Impulse. Along with, thanks to the Reign of the Superman event, a partial clone of Superman running around calling himself Superboy. Well, somebody got the right idea. What if we put them together and bring in some other folks we got poking around, like the new Wonder Girl, the second one. The first one, having been a member of the Teen Titans. You see where we're going here. It's like the going concept. You have Wonder Woman, then Wonder Girl. Wonder Girl grows up and we get a new Wonder Girl. Superman of the Society. Then we get Superman of the League. Superboy. It just Flash, Kid Flash, Impulse. Well, you get the game now. Along with a few others. Some of which would be created exclusively for this comic. Put it in the reins of the always excellent Peter David for the majority of the run. And you have Young Justice, a comic that perfectly encapsulated the late 90s tongue-in-cheek look at adolescence and even shots at the comic book industry and their both tropes and a few meta jokes about the behind-the-scenes stuff. Because if Peter David does anything on a grand level, it is sneak in a few snarky in-joke comments. So let's get back to the beginning, folks. Robin Boy, Superboy, and Impulse first joined together in a one-shot called Young Justice: The Secret, written by Todd DeZago, where they first encounter the mysterious superheroine Secret, freeing her from the captivity of the DEO. They then show up together in the Justice League miniseries World Without Grown-Ups, also written by DeZago, in which a magical being moves all adults to an alternate world. It is at this point that Young Justice, as they would later come to be called, officially, first stumble upon Justice League's old headquarters in Happy Harbor, the so-called Justice Cave, and after helping save the world in the World Without Grown-Ups event, as well as restoring the grown-ups, because that's all part of the game, decide to stay together as heroes in their own right. This leads into the ongoing title, where, while hanging out in the Justice Cave, which they have turned at least the first part of it into a glorified clubhouse, they awaken the Red Tornado, who is in there in storage. after a series of events that led to him contemplating the nature of his own identity. This happened a few times to Red Tornado. Still, he wakes up, initially because literally the three teenage boys annoyed him so much, he actually said, "Forget trying to figure out these deep philosophical questions. I just want to yell at you." He would then decide to become a mentor / chaperone to the team, feeling that his interactions with the teens will help him reconnect with his human side, as they've been the first people to pull a genuine emotional reaction out of him in quite some time, as well as, more importantly, Red Tornado serving as a liaison between Young Justice and the Justice League. The League, by and large, trusting Tornado to keep the boys from getting into too much trouble. Within the first year, though, the group doubles in number with the addition of the aforementioned second Wonder Girl, aka Cassie Sandsmark, the aforementioned Secret, who was revealed to also have the regular name of Greta Hayes, although she would also be nicknamed Susie, and Arrowette, who herself is a legacy character, her mother being the retired Miss Arrowette, a by and large forgotten Green Arrow villainess from way back in his past. Arrowette doing this mostly to bother her mother, who had a serious stage mom syndrome. All of this comes into a lovely grouping as all of the characters interact and flesh together and bounce off each other, managing to stop various villainies with tongues firmly planted in cheek, providing a bit of light fluff counterpoint to the often dark and gritty stories dominating comic books in the 90s. As I said, this actually started in the late 90s, 1998 specifically, but still, it was the 90s. The original series lasted until 2003. I say original series because I'm going to go and throw this out here. Young Justice Rose revived post-Flashpoint, but as usual, our policy on Roulette Productions, because that's the time period where I really just don't deal with DC Comics anymore. I get very annoyed with what they did to their continuity and the storylines they abruptly aborted for Flashpoint New 52. We don't talk about that. It disturbs our genuinely positive atmosphere we try to maintain here at Roulette Productions. Still, the comic had a 5-year run, which is pretty impressive for a niche comic, including participating in various DC crossover events at the time, showing interesting character growth from everybody involved, as well as, more importantly, spawning a few other one-shots, annuals, and helping support the couple characters in here like Robin, who had solo titles. In the beginning of the series, Impulse and Superboy had solo books, but their books were canceled shortly after Young Justice began. There is actually an infamous conversation between Superboy and Impulse where they're discussing the comics the characters read and how their books suddenly got canceled and how much of a bummer it is, how much they're going to miss the stories, only to have Robin come in and the boys to give him a dirty look because, of course, in the real world, Robin's book was still ongoing. See? Snarky inside jokes. Ultimately, over time, the team would find Robin, who being taught by Batman, tends to be very analytical and calm in his temper as the leader, although the somewhat arrogant Superboy does occasionally challenge this. Wonder Girl, whose attraction to Superboy causes her to initially butt heads with Arrowette before the two bond. And Secret, whose amnesic and ethereal nature originally provides an ongoing mystery in the series, and her full origin, which I'm not going to discuss here because we have a low spoiler policy, as always, ties into one of their recurring villains and serves as a story that kind of gets, worked on, set aside for a bit, comes back to prominence, set aside for a bit, to the point that the entire resolution of Secret and her life is not resolved until the very last issues of the series. It is the story arc that, here and there in the background, drives the entire series. Who and what is Secret? Eventually, though, they do pick up a few extra team members. The Ray joins briefly, along with Captain Marvel Jr., aka Freddie Freeman, a clone of Lobo, who, unlike most of Lobo's clone regen things he does not initially go straight to adolescent, but kind of stops in teenage mode. Character referred to as Lil Lobo or occasionally Slobo, since, like pretty much every other version of Lobo, he was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. And original character Empress, who was the daughter of two federal agents who were recurring allies/antagonists of Young Justice. This allowed them to have quite a fun little mix of character interactions, as well as phasing characters out here and there over certain story arcs. Eventually, the stories do get a little more seriously. Due to his part as their mentor, it is in the Young Justice series that Red Tornado faces the fact that, due to his unique status as a sentient being, he must face the idea of potentially losing custody of his adopted daughter, Treya. Things are dealt with, but in the process it brings up very important philosophical questions, especially among the different members of Young Justice themselves, about what they consider alive, human, and therefore has certain inalienable rights guaranteed by the American government. Because, of course, like most DC books, these are Americans, taking place in America. It's a thing. When it's all said and done, though, the book, by and large, is fun and reads at a very nice, quick rate. Perhaps one of the biggest events of it is the Sins of Youth event. This was a story that, while it generally involved the DC universe at large, did put a big spotlight on Young Justice, as the adults were aged into teens and children, and the teenage members of Young Justice became the grown-ups. Thus, they became the main ones that had to try to reverse the spell and fix reality as we know it. Also aged up included a couple of the younger members of Justice Society, especially Courtney Whitmore. This event showcasing the beginning of her first maturations into being a hero. Of course, we've discussed Courtney Whitmore in length in her own video. It is in our lovely archives, should you choose to learn more about her. It also allowed Young Justice to have some of the first genuine one-on-one interactions with the greater heroes and other teams in DC. This leads to many other things. Including the final storyline of the series, where, as I said, the full discussion of Secret and what she is, how she became what she is, and more importantly, what she originally was, all build to a head, and she must make the greatest of all moral choices. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens, but I will say this. When it's all said and done, there's a reason you haven't heard about Secret becoming a member of later superhero teams. Things do, in their own way, reach a conclusion for the character. Whether this is a good or bad thing, you're going to have to read the series to find out. The final storyline also gives some excellent focus to later introduced original character Empress, and nicely ties up other internal conflicts within the team, including the ongoing friendly headbutting, who's really the best there is, between Robin and Superboy, which occasionally took a back seat but was always there behind the scenes. And also dealt with the end of Slobo / Lil Lobo, so that he wouldn't be in the way for regular adult Lobo's adventures. After all, you don't want too many Lobos running around. I mean this quite seriously. Lobo's one of those guys you don't want more than one of in your universe. In fact, most universes don't even want one Lobo. But what happened to Young Justice? I mean, the series ended. Did the team end? Not quite yet. Not quite yet. There is one more major thing going for the team, and that is a crossover miniseries event. You see, at the same time Young Justice had been running, as we had previously said at the start, there was a volume called simply Titans, featuring the grown-up founding members of the Team Titans. This series was concluded around the same time, and both books had a team crossover event referred to as Graduation Day. The basic idea of the miniseries is that a gentleman with a lot of money and not much to do it with decides to bring both Young Justice and Titans to his headquarters with the idea that he will financially sponsor one team, allowing them to not only continue to operate as a team, but, more importantly, have access to major resources so that they could do their thing even better. Fortunately, before things get too intense and we see the teams fighting against each other, good guy versus good guy over a misunderstanding, instead, a robot from the future who genuinely looks like a young adult female, although with altered skin pigmentation, hence her name Indigo, because her skin was an indigo color, shows up and, in an effort to repair herself after her journey through time, causes chaos that draws the nearby two teams to her. And after a bit of conflict on her own, she, in attempts to repair herself, activates a Superman robot, a leftover plot point from the earliest Silver Age, who, having basically all the power level and abilities of the real Superman, proves a devastating opponent to the two teams. When it's all said and done, the teams suffer very serious and tragic consequences for engaging in an enemy neither one of them were fully prepared for. And like the miniseries named Graduation Day hints at, sets up the idea that Young Justice can no longer simply be Young Justice, and that the Titans themselves really need to focus more on what it means now that they are adults and soon to be old enough to be proper full mentors to the younger superheroes in their own right. This would lead to a restructuring of the books. As I said, Titans and Young Justice itself would be canceled. However, we would launch a new volume of Teen Titans featuring a mix of veteran Titans and members from Young Justice graduating to the main team, as well as a few members of the Titans along with some other characters that were brought in for the fun, rebuilding the old Outsiders team, previously led by Batman, now being led by Nightwing, as they attempt to have a more proactive, bigger impact on the world instead of simply being childhood friends, now grown up, hanging around and waiting for bad guys to attack them, which had kind of been one of the ongoing themes of the Titans book. Now we'll no doubt discuss those different eras in more depth, but that does tie up Young Justice, which is what we're here for today. What's the final verdict? If you have any appreciation for DC Comics, read this title. If you are a fan of Peter David, you need to read this series. If you just plain want something that's not constantly dreary, gritty, and beating you down with bummer endings, read this book. In short, unless you just don't like comic books, there's no reason to read this book. It's good for you. Find it online. Digital formats, trade paperback, physical copies. Heck, good sale on a whole stack of back issues. However you can find it, get it, read it, you'll love it. This comic gets my full seal of approval because it just works. It strikes the perfect balance between humor, serious stories, character development, with just a little sprinkling of that beautiful long-term storytelling that every good serial series like a ongoing comic book needs. So with that, I bid you adieu for 7 days. We will come back to more ramblings because that's what we do and that's who we are. Bye-bye, folks.